Thank you very much for joining us for the webinar on invasive alien species entitled Acting on the IPBES IAS Assessment Report Towards the Achievement of Target 6 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Hana Matsuzaki from the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. Before beginning the webinar, I would first like to explain the housekeeping rules of the webinar. This webinar offers Japanese translation. If you press the Earth button on the bottom right, you can switch between Japanese and English. 右下の地球ボタンを押していただくと日英切り替えができますので、日本語での傍聴される方はご活用ください。ただし質問については英語のみの受付とさせていただきますのでご了承ください。In the Q&A session, we will be taking questions from the floor. Please use the Q&A box to post your questions. We will be doing Q&A in English only. When posting your question, please do not forget to share your name, affiliation, and to whom you would like to ask your question. Since we have a lot of listeners from around the world, the webinar will not be extended beyond the scheduled time. Due to limited time, the facilitator may not be able to pick up all the questions posted. We appreciate your understanding on this matter. Finally, please note that this webinar will be recorded and will be archived on the YouTube channel of the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Nakao Fumiko to start the webinar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We would now like to begin the Invasive Alien Species webinar. Acting on the IPBES IAS Assessment Report toward the Achievement of Target 6 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Nakao Fumiko, a Senior Analyst for Biodiversity Information with the Ministry of the Environment, and I'm honored to serve as the facilitator today. In the next 3 hours, we aim to share recent developments about IAS issues and good experiences in tackling IAS in the world. After that, we hope to further discuss necessary actions to enhance international cooperation and private sector engagement. To start us off, please allow me to introduce the Director General of the Nature Conservation Bureau of the MOEJ, Mr. Shiraishi Takao, for his opening remarks. Mr. Shiraishi, the floor is yours.
Hello. On behalf of the Ministry, I would like to welcome you all. It is a great pleasure for us to host this webinar joined by many people from around the world. I would first like to express my appreciation to the G7 members for their cooperation, as this webinar is organized under an initiative led by Japan as the G7 presidency. I'd further like to extend my appreciation to the speakers representing IPBES, CBD, IUCN, as well as TNFD, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, the National Institute for Environmental Study of Japan, and Italian Institute for Environmental Protection and Research. Invasive alien species, or IAS, is one of the 5 main direct drivers of global biodiversity loss and requires global action. Recognizing this, Target 6 was set as part of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Also, last month, the summary for policymakers of the IPBES IAS report was approved, highlighting the need for international cooperation as well as the engagement of various stakeholders, including businesses, in achieving Target 6. Japan has been hosting the technical support unit within the Institute for Global Environmental Studies, IPBES, for this assessment to support the presentation of the report. We sincerely welcome the approval of the SPM and express our gratitude to the co-chairs and authors involved. IAS was also highlighted in this year's G7 Hiroshima Summit and G7 Ministers Meeting on Climate, Energy, and Environment held in Japan. Japan has been strengthening its national policies through enhance regulations, border control, and public awareness. Recent years, we have made progress on public-private partnerships to enhance measures against fire ants, which has attracted a lot of public interest. Although it is more cost-effective to prevent introduction of IAS than to eradicate them after establishment, transboundary movement of IAS is difficult to deal with by a single country. Therefore, international cooperation and engagement of various sectors are essential for a more effective and efficient response to IAS. It is our hope that this webinar will serve as a catalyst for strengthening cooperation across countries and amongst various sectors. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. We received a video message from Mr. David Cooper, Acting Executive Secretary of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, for this webinar. Let us play it now.
Good day to you all. Invasive alien species are a major threat to nature, nature's contributions to people, and to our quality of life. Unfortunately, their impacts are increasing rapidly and are predicted to continue rising in the future. Biodiversity is fundamental to human well-being, a healthy planet, and economic prosperity. So invasive alien species represent a serious threat to people and nature all around the world. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, adopted in December 2022, is an ambitious agreement to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity and to put nature on a path to recovery by 2030. It includes a target, Target 6, to reduce and mitigate the impacts of invasive alien species on biodiversity. This is to be done by identifying and managing the pathways of introduction of invasive species to prevent the introduction of new alien species, aiming to reduce the rates of introduction and establishment by at least 50% by 2030, and by eradicating or controlling those invasive alien species already present, especially in priority sites such as islands. The recently approved IPBES assessment on invasive alien species provides important information to support these efforts. It will also support the implementation of several other targets of the Kunming-Montreal framework, such as those on spatial planning, restoration, conservation, sustainable use, and on reducing the impacts of climate change. The assessment sets out the magnitude of the challenge. There are over 37,000 alien species established worldwide. Of these, there are over 3,500 invasive alien species that cause harm to biodiversity and often to people. Invasive alien species have contributed to 60% of recorded global extinctions and have been the sole driver of 16% of these. Actual annual economic costs of biological invasion in 2019 were calculated as above $423 billion, and this is certainly an underestimate of the true costs. These facts confirm that the attention given to the matter of invasive alien species under the Convention is warranted. The assessment emphasizes that the impacts from invasive alien species can be prevented and mitigated through effective management, and that ambitious progress to manage biological invasions can be achieved with integrated governance. However, the assessment also indicates that overall, the development and implementation of policies to address this problem have been insufficient to date. As we move the Kunming-Montreal framework from agreement to action, I believe that the information from the IPBES assessment will be extremely useful in the development and updating of national biodiversity strategies and action plans to ensure that invasive alien species are properly addressed. In concluding, I would like to congratulate the Ministry of Environment of Japan for their leadership in the presidency of the G7 in supporting actions towards invasive alien species and to all the other G7 countries who are committed to supporting this work. We are all stakeholders in the pursuit of a healthier, more sustainable planet, capable of meeting the growing needs of present and future generations. All sectors, policymakers, scientists, educators, communities and citizens alike can and must contribute to the development of common solutions to the common threats that we face. Thank you for being part of these efforts.
Lastly, I'd like to invite Dr. Anne Larry-Gaudry, Executive Secretary of the IPBES, to give us opening remarks. Without her dedicated years of service to the Secretariat from its inception, IPBES would not be what it is today. Please, Dr. Larry-Gaudry.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for your kind words just now. I would like to really thank the government of Japan for the opportunity to speak in this webinar, which is a follow-up to the G7 ministers meeting on climate, energy, and environment recently hosted by Japan. So the IPBES assessment of invasive alien species and their control builds on the IPBES global assessment released in 2019, which concluded that invasive alien species are one of the 5 direct causes of biodiversity loss. This IPBES assessment was prepared by about 90 scientists and holders of indigenous and local knowledge from all regions of the world and supported by 200 contributing authors. They worked for 4 years, analyzed about 13,000 scientific references as well as other forms of knowledge. The report provides the most comprehensive overview of the issue so far. It provides an overview of invasive alien species, how many, where, how do biological invasions occur, what are the current and future trends in invasive alien species. It then talks about their impacts on biodiversity and on people everywhere on the planet, water, food security, health, and it also provides, as we just heard, a global estimate economic cost of biological invasions. And finally, and importantly, it talks about options for actions by governments, of course, by just about everyone else, businesses, indigenous people, local communities, individual citizens. Overall, the assessment conveys a message of hope. Managing biological invasion is realistic and it is achievable. The assessment is expected to inform the implementation of several of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, including Target 7, but Target 6 and beyond, as well as several of the Sustainable Development Goals. The IPBES assessment report is off to a very good and promising start. Since its launch just a couple of weeks ago, it has already been featured in about 5,000 media articles in 120 countries and 50 languages. And the first significant impacts are already starting to be documented. So it is my hope that one of the outcomes of this webinar will be a strong commitment from the G7 to tackle invasive alien species in an ambitious way, informed by the IPBES report and the wide range of options and responses for management that it offers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper and Dr. Larry-Gaudry for the encouraging remarks. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce the program. For the first agenda item, key presentations from relevant organizations, 3 major global level developments about IAS-related issues will be shared. Then, we'll move on to experiences of countries and relevant stakeholders. In this part, we'll hear about the most recent developments to mainstream biodiversity in economic activities and regional initiatives. The experiences of 2 localities will be shared. Lastly, reflecting these presentations, Our esteemed panelists will briefly discuss what would be the key for enhancing international cooperation against IAS. Now, please allow me to invite the three co-chairs of the IPBES thematic assessment of IAS. As you know, each IPBES assessment report is made possible by the effort of many authors, and the co-chairs play a critical role to ensure an integrated and coherent report. Professor Annibal Porchard, Professor Helen Roy, Professor Peter Sturt, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I will just share my screen, and the three of us are all going to speak to this presentation. Can I just check that you can see the presentation? It is just going into slide mode. Sorry, it's gone to the end. Sorry for that. There we are. You can see from the beginning. Perfect. Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present the IPBES assessment report on invasive alien species and their control. We would really like to thank the Ministry of the Environment of Japan for this opportunity to be with you all and to celebrate this assessment, and particularly because our wonderful technical support unit was hosted in Japan. So Naoki, Tanara, and Ryoko in IPBES, and we are really extremely grateful to them for all of their support and guidance throughout this process. So just to provide an overview of the process for this assessment, it was developed over 4 years. We had 3 author meetings. Our first one was in Japan, and that was really fantastic. I'm just going to double check you can hear me okay. Yes, you can. Perfect. Great. Good. So we had our first author meeting in person in Japan, and that was really an amazing experience, a wonderful opportunity for us to get to know one another, but also fantastic for us to be there in Japan with our technical support unit. And then, of course, there was the pandemic, and so we moved online for our meetings, and our final meeting in Denmark was a hybrid meeting. We had 2 external reviews, and we're really extremely grateful to everyone who provided reviewer comments throughout that process. The insights from that was really, really fantastic, and most definitely added hugely to the quality of the assessment. And just before we met for the IPBES plenary, we had one further review from the government, which again provided fantastic insights for us. As already was mentioned by Anne, we had this amazing multidisciplinary team of 86 experts. We also had 199 contributing authors, and we reviewed over 13,000 documents in depth. But we also had a number of other reviews, which took us through many, many other documents as well. So, for example, for our review on scenarios and models, we screened 33,000 papers for that. But we also drew knowledge from other values and knowledge systems and from the scientific and the grey literature, but really importantly, also information from Indigenous and local knowledge. And we were really very fortunate to have 3 dialogue workshops to engage with Indigenous and local knowledge, one in person in Montreal and then moving online through the pandemic. We also had a call for contributions from Indigenous peoples and local communities, and were able to have really wonderful collaboration with Indigenous and local knowledge experts and holders across the expert team and as contributing authors. So here we are in Japan, our 86 experts from 47 countries across all regions and many, many disciplines. And another opportunity to say a huge thanks to our technical support unit in Japan, and apologies for the error of the name at the bottom there. I will correct that for IPBES. So I thought it might be useful just to begin to remind everyone around what are invasive alien species. So invasive alien species, as Anne mentioned, are one of the 5 major drivers of biodiversity loss. They are animals, plants, and other organisms that have been moved from one part of the world to another part where they would not otherwise naturally occur through human activities. And of all of these alien species, there are a subset that cause some kind of problems. They establish, they spread, and they have negative impacts on nature, and in some cases also on people. And these are termed invasive alien species. This is one of the infographics from the summary for policymakers, and we hope that it outlines to people the biological invasions process on the left, and then some key terms around species status and also mechanisms in relation to the biological invasion process on the right-hand side. So biological invasions describes the process involving the intentional and unintentional transport or movement of a species outside of its natural range by human activities, and its introduction to these new regions where it establishes and spreads in some cases. So just to go very rapidly through some of the headline figures, and we've heard some of these through those wonderful opening statements, and we're very grateful for the kind words towards the assessment. But really the headline message is that people and nature are threatened by invasive alien species in all regions of Earth. So invasive alien species are a huge threat to people and nature, and they're also a growing threat. So 37,000 established alien species have been introduced by human activities worldwide. And we're seeing this increase by about 200 new alien species every year. The subset of those which are causing some kind of problems, some negative impacts on nature, and also in some cases on people, is about 3,500 invasive alien species. And there are more than 2,300 invasive alien species found on lands of indigenous peoples across all regions of Earth. And again, this is another infographic from our summary for policymakers, and we're really demonstrating here a range of different invasive alien species and the ways in which, while they all have some kind of negative impact on nature, there are often cases where an invasive alien species will also have impacts on nature's contributions to people and also in good quality of life as well, in some cases across all of those different categories of impact. So one of our other key headline messages is that current policies have indeed been insufficient so far in managing biological invasions and preventing and controlling invasive alien species. So it's encouraging that most countries, about 80%, have targets for the management of biological invasions within their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. But then looking more deeply into that, about 83% of countries do not have national legislation or regulations directed specifically towards prevention and control of invasive alien species. And nearly half of all the countries do not invest in management of invasive alien species. So just to give a few headlines on the impacts, we know that of all global species extinctions, about 60% have been caused either solely by invasive alien species or by invasive alien species contributing alongside other drivers. We give this huge figure around the economic annual costs of biological invasions of $423 billion US, but we know this is a huge underestimate because there are many intangible costs that cannot be captured. We know that overwhelmingly the impacts on nature and good quality of life and nature's contributions to people are negative, exceeding 80% in all cases of the documented impacts. And what's also extremely concerning is we know that the threats from invasive alien species are increasing significantly in every region. And again, this is another figure from the summary for policymakers showing different groups such as mammals, birds, fishes, etc., and their trends over time in numbers of first records of alien species across the different UN regions. And really the important message to see there is all of those figures are going up and going up very steeply. So at this point, I'm going to hand to my colleague, Annabelle, and he will take over with the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for this opportunity to share our results with an international audience. The IPBES work has been, very long and productive work, and we are very proud of what we had accomplished in these 4 years. And yeah, I'm very thankful of all the more than 200 people that have really helped on this process. So yeah, so basically one of the findings in our report is that people are the heart of the problem, no? So we as humans are the ones facilitating the transport, the introduction, the establishment of these invasive alien species. And if we don't do anything and we keep business as usual, we will have a double or even more in terms of the number of species that we had before. So I think this is going to continue as an exponential trend on the number of invasive alien species. Next, please. Helen? Yeah, okay. So invasive, yeah, so there's also very hard to predict what will happen because there are a lot of interaction between different drivers that force and promote invasive alien species. So, for example, we have climate change, but we also have societal changes like demographic, economics, trade, and land use and sea change. So all these things tend to work together, and sometimes there's synergetic effects. So it's more than the sum of the processes. It's sort of like a multiplication of these different drivers. And especially climate change, we know, and we did a lot of emphasis. We put a lot of emphasis on this in the report about the effects that are very unprecedented in terms of climate change. Next, Helen. So we are also, luckily, we are also at the heart of the solution. So, we cause the problem, but we can also solve it. And I think in general, our conclusion was that we are very, it's not the typical problems that there are no solutions. Here, yeah, it's a complex problem, but there are solutions, and there are solutions for everywhere, no? So we can manage the pathways of introduction. We can manage the targets on a specific invasive alien species or some specific landscape. And we can also do this site-based or ecosystem-based management. So there are options everywhere. Next. And we had, all the tools, and this is a really amazing work by the colleagues in trying to summarize all the potential management options that we have for dealing with invasive species in green, in terrestrial ecosystem, and in blue, in marine ecosystem. There are particular differences. For example, prevention is always the best option, but in marine is sometimes the only option. So yeah, so there are differences, but there are, like we said, there are particular alternatives and actions that you can take at any levels. And I think that they are very well detailed in the report in chapter 5. Next. So yeah, like we were saying, prevention and preparedness are the most cost-effective options. Of course, it's the same with human disease. So prevention should be the rule. But if you cannot prevent, there's also other things that you can do. And in particular, for prevention, it's important the pathway management, import control, pre-border, all these things that we are in invasion biology quite used to talk about. But here in the report, they are very well organized and synthesized. Prevention is particularly important on islands, and it's also in marine and connected water systems. So it's, like we said, that may be the only options in these systems. But it's also important that we have adequate funding, capacity building, and technical and scientific cooperation. So it's important that we do this and transfer technology, monitoring. So we connect all these different initiatives. Next. There are, of course, once you have the problem, there are things that you can do, such as eradications, especially like saying a slow spreading population in isolated ecosystem, the containment and control. When you have this, there's no option to be eradicated, but you can do that in some areas. And there's also finally the option of recovering the ecosystem function through adaptive management. And this is really important in terms of ecosystem restoration. So I think this ties a different concepts that we are using in biodiversity management. Next. In terms of policy and how the institution should deal with this, there are many options, and here we have the tree of policy, and so you can take a closer look in the report. But in the branches, you have 7 actions that you can take specifically to address this, and then you have in the roots you have the enable conditions. So basically, this goes along very well with the Kunming-Montreal target 6 that says that we have to reduce the rates of introduction establishment by at least 50% by 2030. So these are sort of more detailed actions that you can take, but really are in line with what we are also dealing in terms of CBD. Next. Okay, so basically, we in our assessment we had the compelling evidence for immediate and sustained action. So, but we need resources and long-term commitment for preventing and controlling these invasive alien species. We can do it, and that's sort of the positive message. The problem is big, but we also have the solutions, and we can do it. Next, I think I hand it now to Peter.
Thanks, Annabelle. And I think my colleagues have given a very good overview of a general bird's eye overview of the assessment. So we're very proud, as has been indicated. This is the first comprehensive global report on invasive alien species and their control. And it provides what we feel is the best available evidence, critical analysis, and options for governments, civil society, indigenous peoples and local communities, the private sector, and all those seeking to address the issue of biological invasions. And this theme of the need for integrated governance and stakeholder engagement and the engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities, I think really shines through throughout the assessment. Next, please. So our of course, we're not just doing this to assess what's out there, but looking forward in terms of what can be done to meet this global challenge. And we think it's quite clear that Target 6 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is focused on invasive alien species, really has a chance of being achieved. And I think that this assessment can actually help contribute to its realization. But there are many other GBF targets, such as 4 on extinction, 5 on wild species, 10 on food systems, and I could go on, that are severely impacted by invasive alien species. So we think the contributions it goes beyond Target 6. Similarly, with the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 15 is on terrestrial biodiversity, which is perhaps the most applicable, but clearly this report also relates to Goal 14 on marine biodiversity, Goal 2 on food security, Goal 8 on economic growth, Goal 11 on cities, Goal 13 on climate change, Goal 3 on health. I could go on. So it's really relevant. This is a cross-cutting issue, which is reflected in the CBD's treatment of invasive alien species as a cross-cutting theme as well. Next. So one of the major achievements, and we're already seeing this, which is I know I'm pleasantly surprised at the rapidity of impact that we've seen with this IPBES assessment. Governments are already talking about it, starting to internalize it. The increase of support, as we see here in this example, with the new task force that was created in GBIF, to look at information sharing. These are all real on-the-ground developments that are taking place already. Very impressive. Again, I think that it's occurred given that we're only a month out from adoption of the SPM and of the assessment itself. One of our primary goals, one of our mandates, of course, was to share this information within and across countries, and I think we're already seeing some success there. But most importantly, perhaps, the report will support capacity building, right, especially in developing countries. And this really came through, I think, in the plenary, that this is a necessity to help us deal with knowledge gaps and data gaps, but also to increase the biosecurity on a global level, because this is not a problem that can be solved in any one country. It's really, given the interlinked nature of the world economy, we need to solve this problem right across the globe. And hopefully this report will make a major contribution to doing that. Next. Yeah, I think we're, again, speaking of pleasant surprises, I expected media coverage, of course, but I think I can speak for my co-chairs in saying, we were really quite amazed. And for this, I should thank the media department in IPBES itself. Just a great job, getting the message out. We've had media articles in over 50 languages. I think we're in over 120 countries now. It's been amazing to see in terms of the translation that's going on of this, so that it's more so that the report can be conveyed to local cultures in their own languages as well, and on a global level. So we had some big time exposure with the New York Times and CNN and other large news outlets, but I find it equally interesting that we've had such great exposure in small local media outlets as well, because often those do have significant impact when it comes to people making individual decisions about what they're going to plant in their garden, or what sort of pets they're going to import, or what have you, right? So really important that this media message is spreading right across the globe in rapid real time. It was an amazing thing to watch. Next. Yeah, so that's the end of our presentation. I think we've successfully done it in the time frame permitted, and looking forward to the rest of this discussion. And thank you again to the government of Japan for hosting us this morning, and of course throughout the process. Thank you.
And thank you for the great presentation and the teamwork. The key messages of the IPBES IAS assessment report speak to the importance of this issue. Now I'd like to pick up one question to you. Why will climate change in particular increase the risk of invasive species? Someone from the co-chairs can answer this question? Why the climate change in particular will increase the risk of invasive species?
Okay, maybe I can take it first.
Please.
So there are two possibilities. One is that climate change modifies climatic conditions in the invaded range, so it's now more suitable for the invasive species to spread, and so then you have further spread of the invasive species that are already there. So that's the one possibility, but it's also the possibility of interactions such as the ones that are occurring with fires and fuel produced by invasive alien species. So then you have what we call the positive feedbacks of fires and invasive alien species, and particularly plants, shrubs, trees, and grasses, such as the ones we had seen in Hawaii. So there are the two options, and in terms of species moving, I think one good example is the mosquitoes that can go farther, north or south, depending on the hemisphere, and they can start to affect new ecosystems. Maybe Peter and Helen can.
Thank you very much. There's another question. When will the full assessment report be available? Can you answer?
It will be very, very soon. So, of course, the summary for policymakers is already available for everyone. We have been making sure the chapters align with the terminology, etc., in the summary for policymakers, and particularly taking into account the changes that were made through the IPBES plenary. But it will be very soon, and we're very, very excited for everyone to be able to see and access the chapters.
Great. It will come soon. Now, thank you very much for the great presentation. Now, I'd like to invite next speaker, Ms. Marianela Araya-Quesada from the CBD Secretariat, to speak about discussions under the convention. The Secretariat is entrusted various tasks by the Conference of Parties and plays important roles triggering global change. Ms. Araya-Quesada, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen first. Okay, I think it is, or hopefully it is on presentation mode now. So thank you very much. And I want to, first of all, thank the Ministry of Environment of Japan for the invitation to the CBD Secretariat to be part of this webinar. For us, clearly, the issue of invasive alien species has a long history in the convention, and I will be happy to share with you today some information of what is happening under the CBD in this respect. So For this presentation, I'm going to be covering a little bit of the work that we have been done on invasive alien species very quickly, so you have an idea of that as a background, and then, of course, about the recently approved Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that you have already heard about also in the previous presentation. I'm then going to share some information on the work of the liaison group on invasive alien species that was established under the convention, and discuss very briefly the relevance of the IPBES assessment for the work under the CBD. So let me just start by saying that the CBD has been working on invasive alien species for a long time now. So there is history there. And basically, if you want to find the link, you can go to Article 8H of the Convention, which states that parties should prevent the introduction of or control, eradicate those alien species which threaten ecosystems, habitats, or species. So that is the reason why this is an issue discussed under the convention. And then through the years, we have been doing a lot of work, basically following requests by the Conference of the Parties. This is a party-driven process. So some of those important things or products that have come out from the discussions and work of the CBD could be the guiding principles for the prevention and mitigation of the impacts of invasive alien species, which remain very valid right now and are helping countries to strategize their action towards invasive alien species. We have also done some work on pathways for invasive alien species, and the document on pathway categorization has been useful also to assist countries in this respect. And we have also produced some voluntary guidance, for example, one in relation to introduce invasive alien species introduced as pets, aquarium, and terrarium species. And apart from that, there has been a series of technical documents that we call technical series, some of them directly related to invasive alien species in issues of management and in issues of biological control, and others more on taxonomy, but also in relation to invasive alien species as well. So this is just very briefly to share with you some of the previous work that has been done under the CBD. But more recently, as you have heard already by the introductions and by the presentation of the co-chairs as well, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was approved last December, and then pretty much is a global response to the alarming loss of biodiversity. And it's the new set of goals and targets that we have to meet. So these framework pretty much consider those main drivers of change. And one of those drivers, when we talk about direct drivers, is invasive alien species, as you can see there. So this is also based on information from IPBES, and then it confirms that, you know, we're currently in a situation where we have ecosystems that are degraded, we have species and genetic diversity loss, and also we have human well-being jeopardized. So the framework comes as a response to this situation, and it has a set of goals and targets. And within those, we also have target 6 on invasive alien species, which is specific. So you can see the target here, and what we have done is that we've tried to use the color code in here just to show you the different components of the target. So the target has a part of it that will tell you what is meant to be done, and the target pretty much is calling to eliminate, minimize, reduce, and or mitigate the impacts of invasive alien species. And then it tells you how. So basically by identifying and managing pathways, preventing the introduction and establishment of priority IAS, reducing the rate of introduction, and also through eradication. And it has a component that also tells you by how much, and then that is the number component of the target that calls for a reduction of at least 50% by 2030. So I wanted to briefly touch on the target because you have been hearing about it, and probably you will continue to hear about it. So this is why those are the components of the target. But also I wanted to mention that because the targets are time bound to 2030, really we only have 7 years from now to really achieve those targets. So action is to be initiated now if we really want to see a change by 2030. Okay, then just something before I move away from the part of my presentation on the GBF and the previous CBD work, just want to share with you that apart from the targets, which normally is what you you hear about, the framework also has a set of considerations for implementation. And those considerations are an integral part of the framework. So they are equally important as the targets. And there's a full list on section C of the GBF, but I have only reproduced here 3 that I wanted to highlight because of the relevance for invasive alien species. So one of those is the whole of government and whole of society approach. And what that means is that the Conference of the Parties has recognized in the GBF that, the framework cannot be implemented only by one single actor, for example, the government or, international actors. So it really needs a cooperative approach involving the whole of society to be successful in the time frame that we have. And then the other one is science and innovation, the role of science. Of course, scientific evidence and also traditional knowledge has been widely recognized in the framework. And it's also something of paramount importance for the work on invasive alien species. And the final one is cooperation and synergies. Again, it's complementing the whole of government, whole of society approach, but we really need to work together if we really want to have successful implementation of the GBF in a few years. So I said that the second part of my presentation then was going to be also on sharing information with you on the work that we do through the interagency liaison group on invasive alien species. So now that you have heard a bit about what we have done under the convention, the GBF, one of the key mechanisms of support that we have at the CBD Secretariat to work on invasive alien species is actually this group. And the group was established as a response to one of our COP decisions, and it's meant to facilitate cooperation amongst relevant organizations to support measures to prevent the introduction and mitigate the impacts of invasive alien species. So you can see here all the members of the group. So clearly we take advantage of the expertise of these different organizations and the work that they are doing on invasive alien species to try to coordinate that work and select areas on which we can collaborate and work together. So this pretty much speaks to the fact that I think it was Anibal also mentioning that, invasive alien species is a cross-cutting issue, and definitely that is the way in which it is recognized under the work of the CBD. So the liaison group, is also a response to that. And more recently, in the last decision that we have on invasive alien species from COP15, there are several requests for the Secretariat of the CBD to really do in collaboration with the members of the liaison group. So just for you to have an idea, some of those requests involve technical issues, but also they involve issues related to needs and capacity development. So for example, on technical issues, we have a request for the relationship between pathogens and infection diseases to explore that area, and also to support work from other organizations in guidance for example, cleanliness of sea containers, and also on developing of labeling system for living organisms as well in terms of transport. And then when it comes to needs assessment and capacity development, we also have requests for doing an evaluation of existing capacities and needs. And for that, we're thankful now for the IPBES assessments, because that will really going to make our life easier in that respect, and evaluation of existing gaps in knowledge, monitoring and management. And of course, one particular request about updating a toolkit that we have, which is meant to provide guidance to parties in how to implement now Target 6. So those things have been requested by the Conference of the Parties, and we are working on these issues in collaboration with the interagency liaison group. So I think that gives you an idea of how cross-cutting the issue is. It touches on trade, it touches on tourism, it touches on, conservation, databases, so many things that it's impossible for one single actor to deal with invasive species on its own. So what is next then? For the invasive alien species group, we're going to have our next meeting in November, and we're going to discuss the way forward to address the COP request that I have just mentioned to you. We're going to identify any other potential areas of cooperations, and of course the members can request support from other members on projects or activities that they are leading on. So this is pretty much how we work. Then the third part of my presentation is pretty much on the implication of the IPBES assessment for the work of of the convention. I'm going to be brief. You have heard already from the co-chairs a lot of information on the assessment, so I don't intend to duplicate. Just going to briefly say that it's very obvious that, of course, the assessment provides information that it's very key for Target 6 on invasive alien species, but as has been mentioned before as well by the co-chairs, it also provides information that is useful for the implementation of other targets of the GBF in relation to food systems, wildlife, and so many others. But finally, I also want to acknowledge here that I mentioned the framework was not only about the goals and targets, but also about considerations for implementation. And in this respect, the assessment, the framework acknowledges the interactions between invasive alien species and other drivers of change, and the relevance of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches, such as One Health, are part of the GBF, and they are also mentioned on the IPBES assessment as key tools and approaches for tackling invasive alien species. So I think that information is important. And then using this nice image from the summary from policymakers, also I want to highlight the concept of integrated governance that it's presented in the assessment as well, saying that invasive alien species can be also overcome through a context-specific integrated governance approach of biological invasions. And basically what that will imply is enhancing coordination and cooperation across sectors, engagement of a wide range of stakeholders, and also identification of the role and strengths of different actors. So I think this pretty much aligns with some of the requests that we have had from the Conference of the Parties. And I think hopefully this also could guide discussions under the CBD in terms of the approach for invasive alien species. So just to conclude, I just want to share with you what comes next in terms of meetings and activities under the CBD. We are going to have very soon this month, the 25th meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice, the SAPSTA meeting in Nairobi. And one of the main areas of discussion on the invasive alien species item, it's that the Conference of the Parties and the delegates, they will consider a set of annexes that have been produced with support of an expert group. And those annexes are or could become voluntary guidance for the parties if they so wish, eventually during COP. But the technical consideration of these documents is going to happen now in October. And then the other thing important for the item of invasive alien species is that we are also going to consider the review of the findings from the IPBES assessment on invasive alien species and the implication of these findings for the work under the convention. So pretty much those two things cover that agenda item. And then based on the deliberations from the subsidiary body, which should be technical deliberations, then a recommendation is going to be made for the next Conference of the Parties, which is COP16. And my final slide here is what is needed. What do we need then moving forward? Clearly, the message, we need collaboration, including support to the operations of the interagency liaison group. We need consideration of invasive alien species in the update of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Really, that's important. That's to allow the countries to have an entry point to actually take action on invasive alien species. So that should also be considered. We need probably funding. It's a global problem. We cannot just tackle invasive alien species here, but not there. So global funding to continue filling the gaps in research, in data management, and so many other things. And we also need outreach, right? And knowledge sharing and awareness raising in terms of invasive alien species. As I said, it's a global challenge. So we need to convey that message, and everyone can really play a key role in supporting any efforts towards invasive alien species in moving forward. So I think with that, I will conclude, and I will thank you then for the time.
Oh, thank you very much for the very informative presentation detailing the latest development under the convention and the work of the Secretariat as well as interagency liaison group. Let's see the Q&A. Yes. Can you elucidate, I think it's elaborate more on what you mean by priority IAS and priority sites in reducing threats?
Yes. So that's part of the language of the target. And I think it goes back to reflection when the GBF was being developed in terms of acknowledging that you really need to be very strategic in how you take your actions. So you really need to prioritize where you want to invest or put your efforts first. So selecting invasive alien species that probably will have the bigger impact in a particular context and prioritize those that are having the major effects of invasive alien species, for example, icelands and things like that. So it goes in connection with that analysis that should be done when you're going to develop any management options and how you're going to use your resources. So it calls for that prioritization.
Oh, thank you very much. And one more question. Do you have a list of emerging or re-emerging invasive species?
So not as such on the CVD website as emerging and re-emerging, but probably other colleagues on this panel can be better positioned to answer that question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I believe the next speaker. Yes, now I'd like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Kevin Smith, from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, to share IUCN's work on IAS. As you know, the Japanese government, as well as the Ministry of the Environment, are proud to be a member of IUCN. Mr. Smith, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I shall just try and share my screen. So if I share and now present. Okay. There we go. I hope you can see my presentation. Excellent. Thank you very much. So firstly, thank you very much to the Ministry of Environment Japan for inviting us to present on this, and also for taking a real leadership role on this issue over the past year and more. So we really do thank you for helping put invasive species on that international agenda. I'd also like to thank the IPBES team, who have done an absolutely amazing work in producing the IPBES assessment. And IUCN obviously really welcome the IPBES assessment. And in particular, I think one of the key messages that managing and addressing invasive alien species, it's realistic and achievable. We can do it. We may have 7 years, but I think we can make a huge progress towards target 6 if we accept that we can actually do something about it. So I'm just going to talk to you now about what IUCN is doing on invasive alien species in relation to supporting progress towards target 6. Very quickly, IUCN, we're actually a membership union. So we actually have over 1,400 members across IUCN, across 170 countries. And uniquely, they're both state, government agencies, NGOs, and indigenous people organizations. They're the kind of main categories of our membership. We've got over 18,000 experts in our commissions, and essentially they're kind of voluntary experts they're working in academia or in governments or in NGOs, and they kind of form themselves into these groups. And within our Species Survival Commission, we've got a very active invasive species specialist group, and you'll actually hear from the chair of that group, Piero Genovese, later on. And then we have the Secretariat, which is who I work for. We've got 1,000 staff around the world. Every 4 years, we all get together and we kind of have what's called the World Conservation Congress, where our members vote on resolutions and recommendations, which really dictate and set how IUCN as a union are going to move forward. And today we've had about 15 separate resolutions on invasive species. And also just to say, IUCN is 75 years old today. It's our birthday today. So happy birthday, IUCN. We're still young at heart, though. So just very briefly to show how the commissions and the Secretariat work together. So the Invasive Species Specialist Group, there's about 200 experts in the group, and they really are the expert network on knowledge. They hold the data, whereas the Secretariat, where I work, we tend to kind of support the use of it. We're that science policy interface, and we try and make sure that knowledge and data is used in the most effective way to inform policy development and action. It really just to show that we work very closely together. So I'm going to now show the work that IUCN are doing, and I'm going to do it using the Assess, Plan, Act framework. Really, it's kind of like, what are IUCN doing to support the identification and assessment of invasive alien species and their trends? What are we doing to support countries in planning, developing strategies and policies? And what are we doing on action on the ground? So first of all, on the data side of things, IUCN and its specialist group have got lots of different knowledge products and data sets, and I'm just going to run through the key ones that are relevant to this. So first of all is the Global Invasive Species Database. Many of you probably know this. Essentially, it holds species accounts for over 850 different invasive alien species, and it presents information on their distribution, their impacts, how they can be managed, their pathways of introduction, and it's recently gone through a bit of a restructuring process to allow a new search functionality in there. IUCN was also, along with other organizations, through the Global Invasive Alien Species Information Partnership of the CBD, we put together at a request by parties to COP, we put together the Pathways of Introduction Classification Scheme, which is essentially this unified system to categorize the introduction of invasive species. Its aim really is to kind of support that collective national and international effort on identifying, prioritizing, and managing those pathways of introduction. The result was proposed by CBD in 2014 and has since become widely adopted. The Invasive Species Specialist Group have also been key in the development of the Global Register of Introduced and Invasive Species. Again, this was an initiative led by the ISSG through the GIASI partnership. It was launched in 2018. Essentially, it is a validated country-level inventory of introduced species, noting which have got, for which there are evidence of impact. So this is available for every country in the world, and there's additional work going on to mobilize information for those records on their pathways of introduction and their mechanisms of impact. And I think they're also trying to collate species lists, invasive species lists, for higher resolution. So, for example, for protected areas and islands. This information is really fundamental. It's like baseline information that is needed to support countries in developing those national invasive species strategies and action plans that were mentioned earlier. The data is also mobilized through the GBIF platform and on the CBD's clearinghouse mechanism. The environmental impact classification of alien taxa, again, this was requested by CBD COP to the ISSG to do, they were really asked to develop a system for classifying invasive alien species based on the nature and magnitude of their impacts. So a number of ISSG experts published a few peer-reviewed publications, which resulted in an IUCN, what we call an IUCN global standard, being published in 2020. So it's that the global standard is now available. We have a separate guidelines document and a template that can be used to undertake these assessments. So ICAT really, what it is, it uses semi-quantitative criteria to classify alien taxa based on the magnitude of their impact. You can see the categories there on the right, and they go from minimal concern all the way up to massive. So for an example, a species that is assessed as massive concern essentially has led to the non-reversible local extinctions of native species. So ICAT assessments can be done at both a global and at a national level, or even a regional level, and they can be used to support invasive species prioritization. However, just to stress that it's not a risk assessment and it shouldn't be done instead of a risk assessment, but it can provide information to support risk assessments. So all of the global ICAT assessments, you can see here, this is a global invasive species page, the database will be made available through the global invasive species database. You can see there the bar at the top on a species account. And if you clicked on that bar, it will open up the ICAT assessment page, and all that information can then be downloaded. So these are the first batch of ICAT assessments that are coming through, and they will slowly be making their way onto the global invasive species database over time, with more following after that. The IUCN Red List, while it's not only based on invasive alien species, it really provides a really important database and information on the impacts of invasive alien species. You'll probably see that's very, very familiar graphic there to the ICAT categories and criteria, because obviously ICAT followed the Red List approach. The Red List, if you don't know, essentially uses quantitative criteria to categorize species based on their risk of extinction, and vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered, or what we call threatened species. And at the moment, so currently on the IUCN Red List, over 150,000 species have been assessed on the IUCN Red List. And of those, about 40,000 are known to be threatened with extinction. And I think 7,000 of those are known to have invasive alien species as a threat. But what does this tell us? It allows us to look at all the different drivers of threat and how they can compare against each other. So if we just use the taxonomic groups that have been comprehensively assessed, so all species have been assessed within that group, it shows that actually biological resource use and agriculture are kind of they're associated with more threatened species than any other type of threat. So over 60% of threatened species have got agriculture and all biological resource use listed as a threat to those species. You can see over here, invasive species, about 25% of threatened species have got invasive alien species as a driver of their extinction risk. However, the picture really does change. And as the IPBES presentation showed earlier, when you look at extinct species, so when we look at those species that have been globally extinct, you can see that invasive alien species are associated with more extinctions than any other driver of threat, with biological resource use coming in second. So using this data, we can really support tracking progress towards Target 6. So the proposed headline indicator for Target 6 is this rate of establishment, which will look at the change in number of invasive alien species over time that is expected to be established. And it's using a modeling approach based on the known records. Now, the known records are largely based on the GRIS data that I showed you earlier. So this indicator will be relying heavily upon the data mobilized by the Invasive Species Specialist Group. There's also a proposed complementary indicator for the Target 6, which is the IUCN Red List. So what the IUCN Red List Index does is that it uses red list assessments that have been repeated over time for taxonomic groups, and it looks at the change in the overall risk of extinction. And so if you just look at those species that are threatened by invasive alien species, you can see how the threat has, the overall level of threat has increased. So a red list index value of 1 means that all species are least concern. With an index value of 0, all species are extinct. And then this data can be kind of disaggregated by region. So you can see on the right-hand side for Africa, New Zealand, and Europe. The Invasive Species Specialist Group are also running the official target for the SDGs, target 15.8, which is really a response level indicator. So they're collating information on the proportion of countries that are adopting national legislation relevant to the invasive species, and also the proportion of countries that allocate resources relevant to the prevention or control of invasive species. And this indicator is also being incorporated into the CBD process. But what do we want to do? Well, as we saw, IPBES has mobilized a huge amount of information, and it's really, really valuable. We really would like to make sure that a lot of that data finds its way into these online databases to make it accessible, to keep it alive so it can keep on being maintained and updated. We really would like to, for those 3,500 invasive alien species, we really would like to undertake ICAT assessments on those and make them available for the Global Invasive Species Database, and also all the data on pathways and their distribution into our global register of introduced species. But of course, this will need resourcing. In a very similar vein, it's really, really critically important that we find sustainable resourcing for maintaining these data sets. For example, on ICAT, GRIS, and GISD. The Invasive Species Specialist Group have done amazing work over the past decade in keeping these databases alive, but it's a hard battle. We really are trying to find sustainable resourcing for these to help countries achieve Target 6 moving forward. But we've also identified additional data sets that we think will be very beneficial. For example, a database on management actions that allow people to search and find different types of management actions that have taken place, how effective have they been, how much they cost, what scale of application. We also think it'd be very useful to have a database on pathway management. What codes of conduct have been put in place, what best practices are there, what legislation is being used to help manage those different pathways of introduction. And finally, we really think it'd be useful if we could find a mechanism to promote sharing of risk assessments across countries. In terms of planning, IUCN are doing lots of work on supporting planning, supporting countries and others in developing action plans. We have produced, the Invasive Species Specialist Group have worked, and IUCN have worked very closely with partner organisations to develop lots of different guidelines and best practices. For example, with the IMO on biofouling management, we've done on urban work for invasive species, the protected area guidelines with the Council of Europe, as we mentioned earlier, on biological control. And with the European Commission, we did some work on incorporating animal welfare into the decision-making processes around vertebrate invasive species management. But one document I just want to highlight quickly are our guidelines for the management of invasive species on islands. Essentially, this is a document that we produced in about 2018 that really is a practical document that can support islands in developing strategies. It lays out all the essential components that are needed for an action plan and allows that planning process to work through them and identify what they need and how they can be implemented. These guidelines are available in English, Spanish, and French. The ISSG have also worked with the Council of Europe, producing codes of conduct for many of the important pathways of introduction, for example, on hunting or pets, or zoos and aquaria. And IUCN have been working since 2016 with the European Commission to support them in implementing the EU invasive species regulation. And we've produced lots of different guidelines, for example, on brochures. We've produced identification guides for customs authorities and surveillance measures. We've also produced over 95 different best practices for the management of invasive alien species at the European level. One key document that's come out of this work with the European Commission, which was a document that was developed by CEH and IUCN and ISSG members on the guidance for interpretation of those CBD pathway categories. Because I think sometimes it can be a little bit confusing about which category to assign. So this document really sets out what those different pathway categories are, what they aren't. It provides case studies, and it also really helpfully provides these flowcharts that allow countries to work through and work out what category you should be assigning. So moving forward, IUCN are really committed to working through the Interagency Liaison Group to help CBD implement those decisions. We've been working with partner organisations also. We really want to work on developing guidance to support countries in developing these national invasive species strategies. We want to work with countries in implementing these NISAPs. And critically, we also want to work with the private sector. They obviously have got a major role to play, particularly around the prevention of introduction of invasive alien species. And I think they can make huge contributions in helping us achieve Target 6. In terms of action on the ground, IUCN are also doing work primarily kind of through our members, but also through our regions. For example, we ran a project through our East African region, working closely with partners in the West Indian Ocean Islands, where we helped mobilize lots of knowledge. We developed partnerships within islands and also across at the regional level. We helped them develop strategies, including with the islands document that I showed earlier, and also undertook management actions on the ground. IUCN also run the Save Our Species grant funding scheme. It's a grant funding scheme that supports and funds science-based action on species that have been assessed as threatened on the IUCN Red List. And today, we've had 13 grants specifically tackling invasive alien species, including a very recent one working on the Mauritian gecko to address the vertebrate predators on the island. Moving forward, IUCN are quite keen to set up and establish a rapid eradication grant scheme through the SOS scheme to support governments and civil society to really act quickly in undertaking the most cost-effective way of dealing with invasive alien species, and that's eradicating before they become established and spread. It would also allow access to the great knowledge in the ISSG network. And we also want to continue to run these projects at a national and regional scale, implementing actions on the ground and developing strategies. So that's it for me. So thank you very much. There's just a few links to support the work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentation and happy birthday to IUCN. I'm sure that the work of IUCN, particularly mobilizing data and setting standards to inform policy and action, will continue to be key for the global community in taking measures against invasive alien species. Let's see about the questions. The previous questions about the list of emerging or re-emerging invasive species. Do you have I guess you have, right?
Sure. I mean, I can quickly mention on that. I mean, so I mentioned the Global Register of Introduced and Invasive Species, and what that does, it provides validated checklists of known species that are alien in countries and that have also got evidence of impact. However, when we're talking about those that are emerging, there's a process that's being primarily driven by actually Helen, who presented for IPBES earlier on horizon scanning. Now, it's a really important process that countries can go through to identify what we call kind of door knocker species, so species that may not yet be present in a country, but this process allows you to identify which species you need to be concerned about, what pathways they may be coming in on, what kind of impacts they may be having. So that's a really important process to use, and often that will pull on data from things like the GRIS data set to help inform that information.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really encouraging. Okay, due to time constraints, let us move to the next item. By the way, thank you very much, Mr. Kevin, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Let us move to the next item on the agenda. I kindly ask, the next agenda is experiences of countries and relevant stakeholders. The first speaker will be Ms. Laura Crevey from the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, known as TNFD, and she will share with us about the recently announced TNFD recommendations, guidance, and metrics. Ms. Crevey, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. I will just share my screen. Great, I hope you can all see that, but please shout if you can't. So to introduce myself, my name is Laura Clavey. I am a Senior Technical Manager at the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and my particular role is being the Secretariat Lead for the development of TNFD's approach to metrics. Thank you very much for having us here. Very grateful to be involved in this initiative. So a quick overview of what we'll discuss in this presentation. So I'll provide a brief understanding of the TNFD framework and talk about our release that we had 2 weeks ago. And then I'll provide an introduction of how invasive alien species fit within it and the work we undertook in developing. Just covering what we will cover in this presentation. So we'll finish off with some future outlooks on how invasive alien species are considered and how we look to address it in the future as well. So this is a quick overview of the publications that we released 2 weeks ago, to show different elements of the TNFD framework. And just an answer, we're a task force that's led by the market, and we have over 40 different institutions and corporates from over 10 different countries. And we come together to create recommendations for the market around how organisations should measure their impacts and dependencies on nature and how these turn into risks and opportunities. So we did our version 1 release just over 2 weeks ago now, which we launched at New York Climate Release Week. And this included the TNFD recommendations, which sit at the top of this pyramid. But it also included additional guidance, which are these other elements to help organisations start to implement the TNFD framework and start to consider how they can start measuring their risks and opportunities that are related to nature. So that includes simple documents based around how to actually get started, but also some more detailed guidance around the LEAP approach, which is the risk management framework approach, guidance on specific biomes, guidance on specific sectors, and also on scenario analysis, target setting, and engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities. To note as well that our approach isn't reinventing the wheel. We're not starting afresh, but we're building on the work that's already in the market, including lots of different science organisations and NGOs, some of which are here today in this event. So we have 19 core knowledge partner organisations, and also many other individual experts that contributed expertise to the development of the framework and provided a wealth of knowledge in that respect. As this slide shows the core content of the recommended disclosures, of course, this content is available on our website. I won't go into it in detail because it's not the focus of this webinar, but just note that we have 14 recommended disclosures, which are the information that TNFD asks organisations to disclose to the market. And these are organised around 4 different pillars. So there's governance, strategy, risk and impact management, and metrics and targets. And for organisations that are familiar with the TCFD, that's the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, these 4 familiars and these 4 pillars and the structure should look very familiar to them. These recommendations are also supplemented with additional guidance, which we term the LEAP approach. And note that this is not mandatory guidance, it's suggested guidance that we organisations can use to help measure their impacts and dependencies, risks and opportunities on nature, but it is not necessary in order to say you are meeting the TNFD requirements. So they are designed as a reference manual for an internal assessment team, so for organisations to use internally, and they're based on extensive market feedback and pilot tested by over 240 institutions across different sectors, geographies and biomes. There's a flexible approach within them, so it can be adapted depending on your type of organisation, so particularly whether you're a corporate or a financial institution. And there are 4 main elements within them. So it starts with locating your interface with nature, for evaluating your dependencies and impacts. You then assess your risks and opportunities, and then finally preparing to respond and report. And this information is the information that you would then feed into your financial disclosures. So then moving on into how invasive alien species fit within the TNFD recommendations and guidance. This is just a quick overview of the definition that we use within the framework, and this is contained within the glossary within the main recommendations. So we define invasive alien species as species whose introduction and/or spread by human action outside their natural distribution threatens biological diversity, food security, and human wealth and well-being. Alien refers to the species having been introduced outside its natural distribution. Invasive means tending to expand into and modify ecosystems to which it has been introduced. Thus, a species may be alien without being invasive, or in the case of a species native to a region, it may increase and become invasive without actually being an alien species. And this is, so note we have the references, this definition here. So again, we've tried to align with the most common and the most scientifically recognised references available within the market and to keep our definitions based on science. So where do invasive alien species fit within the recommendations? For us, the business risks and opportunities are generated from dependencies and impacts on nature. And invasive alien species are aspects of nature that organisations affects organisations' dependencies, but also their impacts. So, for example, an organisation that's depending on a particular area or species of plants, animals within that area may be affected by alien invasive species that were introduced there either by the organisation or by external factors, because they may affect the abundance of those native species or may introduce pests or diseases that affect the availability. So if organisations that then depend on those species as inputs for their production process, any changes in the availability may affect the costs. It may result in them to change location, them to take actions to remove the invasive alien species or protect the native species. Equally, organisations have a responsibility to ensure that they and not the ones introducing invasive alien species or creating issues for habitats and ecosystems that they are operating in. So they have a responsibility to understand their impacts and how that relates to invasive alien species. Both dependencies and impacts can generate risks and opportunities for the organisation, which have financial implications. So particularly in terms of risk, these could be physical risk or transition risk. So an example of the physical risk could be that where an invasive alien species is related to a business dependency, this creates financial implications in terms of the cost of removing invasive alien species or the cost of bringing in different resources within the supply chain or the operations to make up where they have been affected by them. But in terms of the transition risk, there's risks associated with different fines or penalties, the introduction of invasive alien species, or there's also the risk of reputational damage, where business has not fully accounted for their impact and has not taken the proper actions to prevent it or to mitigate it. So these financial implications can affect the business bottom line. It can affect their income and their revenue. And where this is material, this needs to be disclosed to the market in order to show investors and regulators what's happening in that area. They also require informed management responses, so that feeds back into the LEAP process of understanding how big these risks are, how big these opportunities are, and how management responses should inform these in order to help the business going forward. So within the different recommendations, invasive alien species and the dependencies and impacts associated with them will fit within a number of the recommended disclosures. So this slide just highlighted was the most relevant, that all of them will be affected if it is a material issue. So within the strategy pillar, it asks for a description of the dependency, impact, risk and opportunity the organisation has identified over the short, medium and long term. And it also asks the organisations to describe the effects of nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities on the organisation's business model, value chain, strategy and financial planning, as well as transition plans into the future. Within the risk and impact management pillar, the recommended disclosures would want the organisation to describe the processes for identifying, assessing and prioritising nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities, and that's both in the direct operations and within the value chain. And would also ask for a description of the organisation's processes for managing nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities. And the metrics and targets will ask for disclosure of the relevant metrics and targets assessed with these descriptions that have been provided, which is what we're going to look at a little bit more now. So before going into the specific metrics that we have on invasive alien species, I'll just give a quick overview of the different segments of 13 FD metrics. So we have a tiered approach to metrics, and the idea behind that is to provide comparability for report users, but also flexibility for report preparers in determining what they need to disclose to the market. So we have core global metrics, and that we require all organisations to report for cross-sector comparability. Core sector metrics, which we ask all organisations in certain sectors to report on, and additional metrics, which are there to support organisations where they are relevant and decision useful, but are not required to be reported, and assessment metrics, which are used within the internal framework design process and the assessment process. So our approach to metrics starts with the 5 drivers of nature change. And this is for a number of reasons. It's partly because it's an easy area for organisations to start with, and is easier to be attributed directly to business and finance than some of our other categories of metrics. but it also helps promote market cohesion because these drivers of change are so well known within the market. And invasive alien species are one of these drivers of change. So they're the fifth one in the column mentioned here. And it's worth mentioning as well that we have made a distinction between mitigating negative impacts and contributing to positive impacts on nature. And we follow that through for reporting purposes. So just as an example here, where you mitigate negative impacts for organizations, it could be reducing your impacts in terms of accidentally placing less invasive species within a certain area. But positive impacts could be actual conservation actions themselves, or removing invasive species where they already exist, where they're not caused by the organization in the first place. So this slide shows our core global metrics, which are focused on impacts and dependencies. So we have 9 core global impacts and dependency indicators, and these organize around the 5 drivers of change identified by IPBES. So all of the core ones are focused on land, freshwater, and ocean use change, pollution, pollution removal, and resource use and replenishment. For climate change, we refer to TCFD for their indicators and metrics, and to ISSB, as that's where the latest thinking is, but we acknowledge it as part of nature. And for invasive alien species, we have a placeholder core metric, and that's looking at measures against unintentional introduction of invasive alien species. And by placeholder, we mean that we have the intention in the future to include it as a core metric. However, at this point, the task force made the decision not to have it as core because we wanted to spend more time speaking to the market, speaking to scientists, and understanding how feasible it is to be measured and the best way to do it before we make it core. But it's showing the intention of us acknowledging its importance and trying to encourage organisations to get started reporting on it as soon as possible. So we have 2 disclosure metrics on invasive alien species within the TNFD framework. So the placeholder core disclosure is the proportion of high-risk activities operated under appropriate measures to prevent unintentional introduction of invasive alien species or low-risk designed activities. And this was a metric that we designed both with feedback from consultation processes and speaking to organisations themselves, but also speaking to different experts within the industry, and that includes the Ministry of the Environment for Japan. Within this, we think it is a good start for the market. We think focusing on prevention and the actions is an easier starting point than actual measurement itself. However, we still want to do more work in it, and particularly try to define what high-risk activities are or low-risk design activities, and feed that through to different sectors so become more specific to certain sectors. We also supplement this metric with an additional disclosure metric, which is the number or extent of unintentionally introduced species, varieties, or strains in areas owned, operated, used, or financed in priority areas. And this is a metric that we encourage organisations to report where it is relevant to them, but we provide a bit more flexibility around which organisations deem it to be relevant based on their particular circumstances. And just to note as well that both of these metrics were aligned to be relevant to Target 6 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, but all of them will also be relevant to Target 15, which is understanding the private sector's and organisations' contribution. So I'll just finish off with some of the challenges that we had when designing the framework in relation to invasive alien species, and also some of the next steps. So when we held our consultation and speaking to organisations through the piloting process, we found that although some sectors already quite progressed in this area and are aware of which species they need to be measuring and have location-specific measurement processes in place, there is quite a lack of understanding and measurement of invasive alien species for many different sectors and many organisations within them. So there is really a need for standardised guidance across different sectors that organisations that may just be starting on their journey into nature-related reporting and measurement can turn to with an easy starting point. And the standardisation within that is particularly important because if it's measured in a standardised way, it allows it to be compared across different organisations. And that's very helpful for decision making, both at the government level and for investors as well. So this is a growing area for TNFD. It's not going to stop just because we've done our first release. So we can continue to consult with the market and different experts to understand their reactions to disclosure metrics we've already released and consider how these can be adapted or improved with more guidance for the version 2.0 release. And we also intend to expand the sector guidance over time. So this will have considerations of how the core and additional metrics that I just presented can be refined and adapted for different sectors and measurement guidance around them. And we will continue working with different experts in this area in developing that work. I think that was the last slide, so thank you.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. We hope that nature-related financial disclosures, including disclosures related to measures against invasive alien species, will soon become the norm to further encourage a shift towards nature-positive financial flows. Considering the limited time available, I'd like to go straight to the next speaker. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Clarissa C. Arida from ASEAN Center for Biodiversity to share with us about the ASEAN Action Plan for Invasive Alien Species Management. Ms. Arida, now for...
Thank you very much, Ms. Fumiko. Yeah. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. We would like to extend our congratulations to the Ministry of Environment of Japan for holding this international webinar on invasive alien species featuring the IPBES assessment report. And thank you for inviting the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity in this very important and timely event. My presentation will focus on the recently approved ASEAN Action Plan for Invasive Alien Species Management. This was led by Indonesia as ASEAN Chair for 2023. The ASEAN Action Plan was approved by the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on the Environment in August 2023 in Lao PDR. This is the IPBES Global Assessment Report in 2019, which highlighted that invasive alien species is one of the 5 main direct drivers of global biodiversity loss. And I will not dwell into the details of this because most of this has been discussed by previous speakers. This is a target 6 of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, and definitely this is a very important resource in the implementation of the ASEAN Action Plan for Invasive Alien Species Management and in achieving the target 6 to the KMGBF target to reduce the rate of introduction and establishment of invasive alien species by 50% by 2030. Including eradicating or controlling invasive species, especially in priority sites such as islands. Then last month in Bonn, Germany at the IPBES Den plenary, this landmark thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control was adopted. Much as has been said already this evening on this assessment report, which provides compelling and best available evidence and options to address the issue of biological invasions. In Southeast Asia, the invasive alien species have become a significant threat to the region's biodiversity, with numerous species adapting and establishing themselves in the wild. In 2015, a study with the IUCN Invasive Species Specialist Group listed invasive flora and faunal species from terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems. Indonesia has 181 species recorded, with 148 recorded species in the Philippines and 145 in Malaysia. We have, as part of our annex of the ASEAN Action Plan on Invasive Alien Species Management, the list of recorded species all over ASEAN countries. This infographic was taken from the third edition of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook, which was launched in December 2022 at the COP15 in Montreal. Invasive alien species is a constant threat to fragile ecosystems that incurred high costs of management and control. The ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook 3 has highlighted the following challenges in addressing this issue: the inadequate efforts to tackle the problem on invasive alien species in the ASEAN region, the limited capacity on invasive alien species management, insufficient information on aquatic pathways for these species, including its impacts, and the need for full inventory of invasive alien species. This assessment in the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook also became the basis partially of the approved ASEAN Action Plan on Invasive Species Management. With these challenges, invasive species are also impacting the agriculture and the health sectors. The introduction of golden apple snail, for example, resulted into serious infestation in the rice fields in Southeast Asia. In the Philippines, this golden snail invasion incurred annual costs of rice agriculture estimated at $731 million to around $2 billion and thereby also threatening food security. There are at least 16 invasive bird species that have been identified in Southeast Asia. One of these is the feral pigeon, which compete with native species and are also capable of transmitting zoonotic diseases such as avian influenza. Here I will just mention some of the initiatives that have been undertaken by the ASEAN member states and the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity in tackling invasive alien species in the past. There have been policies and initiatives. Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines have developed their National Invasive Species Strategy and Action Plan, or the NISAPs. Thailand has established a list of invasive alien species and national control measures. And in Vietnam, a strong legal regulation system on import and export of biological materials is in place. There were also some capacity building efforts that we conducted, but this has been very limited. We had the workshop on invasive alien species management in 2008 in Vietnam. And in 2012, in cooperation with the Ministry of Environment of Japan and the CBD Secretariat, we had the sub-regional capacity building workshop to address invasive alien species at that time to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets in East and Southeast Asia. We also have the database on invasive alien species of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, with a current record of more than 300 species and with each species described in a fact sheet. We also have links to these various other sources of invasive alien species in the region, such as the Forest Project and the CABI database. You can check this QR code later for more information. The ECB also develops knowledge products, including policy briefs on preventing and controlling invasive alien species. We also produce a video production on the impacts of invasive alien species in the region. But clearly, all these efforts are not sufficient to reduce or mitigate the impacts of invasive alien species on biodiversity and ecosystem services. Thus, the ASEAN recently adopted the ASEAN Action Plan for Invasive Alien Species Management. Led by Indonesia, the ASEAN Action Plan was developed to scale up efforts to address the invasive species threat more efficiently, effectively, and sustainably, by promoting a regional approach through shared responsibility in increasing awareness, education, and by improving prevention and control measures. The action plan was developed through a series of technical consultations and review processes in the region. The plan also provides an analysis on the roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders in invasive alien species management. These are some of the gaps on invasive species management based on the analysis that we had: the lack of comprehensive data on the distribution and impact of invasive species in the region, limited capacity and resources, inadequate legal frameworks such as comprehensive legislation and regulations, and limited public awareness on the threat of invasive alien species. The action plan has these 4 has 8 goals, and I will highlight the key action areas for each of these goals in the next few slides. Under Goal 1 on strengthening legal frameworks and coordination, this will include harmonization of policies, protocols, and procedures, creation of technical advisory groups, and establishing IAS coordinators in ASEAN member states. Under Goal 2 on enhanced awareness of the impacts of invasive alien species, this will include developing educational curricula, establishing a network of stakeholders, and promoting citizen science. Under Goal 3, on increasing capacity and resources, this would include mobilizing and maintaining knowledge, for example, enhancing our web-based information resource platforms, promoting partnership with academia and research institutions, and enhancing skills and techniques, for example, developing surveillance and monitoring tools such as using remote sensing, mapping, and data analysis. For Goals 5, we will strengthen biosecurity to prevent the introduction of species across the border, identify and analyze current pathways of invasive alien species, and on Goal 6, to improve prevention and security measures, we will improve capacity building to control and eradicate invasive alien species, and also undertake ecosystems restoration and recovery of native species population. On the last 2 goals on improving monitoring, evaluation, and reporting system, we will strengthen the capacity of the ASEAN member states and the region as a whole as part of our work at the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity in our capacity for monitoring, evaluation, and reporting on invasive alien species. And last but not the least, the very important part of implementing this action plan is indeed mobilizing funds from various sectors, including the private sector, and ensuring the sustainability of funding for invasive alien species management. Clearly, these proposed actions in the ASEAN region would require a whole of government and whole of society approach, as alluded by the CBD Secretariat, to help halt the loss of biodiversity through reducing the introduction of invasive species. This is my last slide, and I just want to give some key messages based on this. Indeed, the assessment report of the IPBES on invasive alien species management is very important, and it will feed into the implementation of the action plan for IAS management in ASEAN, thereby contributing to the Target 6 of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework. The success of the action plan requires integrated planning, stakeholders' participation, continued monitoring and assessment, and sustainable financing for invasive alien species management. By taking collaborative and inclusive approach, the ASEAN countries can enhance their capacity to address the challenges posed by invasive alien species and protect our unique biodiversity and ecosystems. Thank you very much for your attention, and please visit our websites and our media links. # we are ASEAN Biodiversity. Thank you very much, Ms. Momiko.
Thank you for the great presentation, Ms. Arida. We see that addressing IAS will require not only global, but also regional cooperation. In this regard, I believe that the experience of the ASEAN Action Plan can serve as a model for countries planning to promote actions against IAS at a regional level. We have questions, but because of the time constraints, I'd like to move on to the next speakers. So, Ms. Arida, keep in mind in the questions in the Q&A box when you participate in the panel discussions, please.
Yes, thank you.
So now I'd like to invite Dr. Goka Koichi, National Institute of Environmental Studies, Japan, to share Japan's action to combat IAS.
Thank you for your introduction. I will share my presentation just a moment, please. Can you see my slide presentation? Okay. Hello, everyone in the world, and good evening to all Japanese audience. I'm Goka from the National Institute for Environmental Studies. I will now talk about forefront of our efforts in invasive alien species management in Japan. Amidst the advance of globalization, Japan has been facing a continuous invasion of alien species. We have been developing various control methods to counter these invasive alien species. Here, I will introduce a few noteworthy achievements. The first case is the mongoose. This species was intentionally introduced from the Asian continent into Okinawa and Amami Oshima Islands as a natural predator of venomous snakes inhabiting the southwestern islands of Japan. As a result, the naturalized population has caused significant damage to the native species in these islands. Since 2005, the Ministry of the Environment has been promoting a planned eradication of mongoose. Through systematic capture efforts, the mongoose population has been successfully reduced to low densities on the two islands. In particular, it is expected that complete eradication from Amami Oshima Island will be achieved shortly. The next case is the control of unintentionally introduced ant species. Japan is a major importer. We constantly face a high risk of unintentional introduction of invasive species. We utilize chemical insecticides for the control of these invasive ants. I have personal experience of working in a pesticide manufacturing company. Based on my experience and knowledge in insecticide development, I have been collaborating with pesticide manufacturers to advance the development of chemical control methods for invasive ants. Among these alien ant species, the Argentine ant has globally expanded its distribution through international trade since the 19th century. In Japan, since 1993, they have invaded and been established in various port cities, and they have expanded their distribution even to inland areas such as Gifu and Kyoto prefectures. While this species has low toxicity, it forms huge colonies and the countless workers outcompete native insects. Further, they invade homes and causing psychological distress to humans. To control invasive ants, it is little effective for eradication to kill workers working on the ground. Based on the social system, we need to target and eliminate the queens and the larvae of next generation queens inside the nest. So bait treatment will be effective, in which worker ants are made to carry bait containing insecticide back to the nest and to feed the bait to queen and larvae, and finally eradicate whole nest. We try to develop effective control method using bait treatment, targeting the established populations in Tokyo. Through bait treatment to invaded area, the Argentine ant population rapidly declined and the native populations increased. 3 years after treatment start, no Argentine ants were captured in traps in the test area. Furthermore, we constructed an extinction probability model, and based on the model, we decided the timing, the end of the area ant control. Since then, up to the present, Argentine ants have never been detected in this area. We also considered the ecological risks of insecticide and evaluated the recovery of arthropod communities after chemical control. As a result, it was confirmed that native communities quickly recovered after the control measures were concluded. Based on our successful Argentine ant control in Tokyo, we have created a control manual of Argentine ant. Based on this manual, local governments in various regions have taken the lead in controlling Argentine ant local populations. So far, we have achieved nearly complete eradication in the Kanto region. Our goal is the eradication of Argentine ants from all over Japan. Recently, the alien ant that has attracted the most attention in Japan is the red imported fire ant. The red imported fire ant has also expanded its distribution from its native South America to North America, Oceania, China, Taiwan, and Japan, riding the waves of the global economy. Since its first detection in Kobe port in 2017, the red imported fire ant has entered Japan by hitching rides in containers, mainly exported from China. It is reported that the red imported fire ants are increasing in China, so it is considered that invasion of the ants into Japan will continue to occur in the future. Since 2019, the natural colonies of red imported fire ants has also been confirmed in several major ports in Japan. Some of them produce even the next generation of queen ants, so we be aware that dispersion of these colonies. We have been developing effective control methods for each stage of the invasion. At first, we developed a method for eradicating ants before the container importation. We discovered that component AITC in wasabi has a strong repellent effect against the fire ants. Using this component, we developed materials able to keep fire ants away. Next, we developed a method for eradication of the red imported fire ants within containers unloaded at the port. We found that peroxide aerosol sprays are effective for eradicating fire ants inside containers. Using this formulation, we established a system for disinfecting containers. Next, we developed technology to detect quickly the invasive ant individuals dispersing inland. The size of the ant is too small and difficult to identify with naked eye. Therefore, we developed a technology to detect the fire ant at the DNA level using a DNA amplification technique called LAMP. We then packaged the equipment and reagents of the LAMP method into kits and distributed them nationwide. And in the case where fire ants nets have been established, the control method follows a scheme similar to Argentine ant control, primarily based on the bait treatment. We have developed more effective baits for the fire ant. So far, we have successfully eradicated any nest of the ants discovered within the ports, and there have been no confirmed reports of their spread inland. As mentioned above, Japan has been strengthening countermeasures to invasive species entering into our own territory from other countries. On the other hand, we have been relatively indifferent to invasive species exported from Japan. As international trade continues to grow, native species in Japan are also becoming invasive alien species in other countries. In 2018, the New Zealand government refused to allow the importation of cars from Japan because a large number of Japanese stink bugs were found attached to them. In the future, if the red imported fire ant population continues to increase in Japan, there is a possibility that Japan could be a large fire ant export country, causing trade disruptions. Invasive species could potentially become non-tariff barriers in international trade in the future. This is a risk faced by all countries and companies, and countering invasive species requires establishment of international rules and cooperation among various sectors. Lastly, I'd like to introduce a problem that is a spin-off but very important and often overlooked problem. That is infectious disease, the ultimate biological invasion. While humans have been affected by COVID-19 in these 3 years, similar issues are occurring in the world of wildlife. One prominent example is frog-kitten mycosis. This is an emerging infectious disease specific to amphibians. Since the 1980s, the pathogenic fungus Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis has spread worldwide, with cases reported where wild amphibian populations became infected and died off. In Japan, the pathogen was first detected in imported exotic pet frogs in 2006. At that time, there were concerns that native Japanese frogs might face extinction. Through our PCR testing system, we gather DNA samples and information of the pathogen from within Japan as well as the various parts of the world. The phylogenetic analysis based on the obtained DNA information of this pathogen strongly suggested that its place of origin is Japan, and it was considered that during the process of humans and amphibians be transferred around the world, this Japanese fungus spread globally. Controlling infectious disease and invisible form biological invasion is an important challenge that requires further discussion in order to conserve the health of both humans and wildlife in the future. As a mid-term comprehensive policy on management of IAS in Japan, the Ministry of the Environment developed the current invasive alien species control action plan reflecting Aichi biodiversity targets. The action plan will be revised and published by FY 2024, taking into consideration the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, Japan's National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, and IPBES Invasive Alien Species Assessment Report. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the great presentation, Dr. Okuoka, which clearly illustrated the situation and efforts in Japan, including developments in countermeasure technologies. Taking into consideration the limited time available, let us move on to the next speaker. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Piero Genovesi, Head of the Wildlife Service, Italian Institute for Environmental Protection and Research, to share experiences on IAS in Italy. Please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the invite from the Minister of Environment, Japan. I hope you see my presentation. I am the head of the Wildlife Service of the Institute for Environmental Protection and Research in Italy, but I'm also the chair of the IUCN Invasive Species Specialist Group that Kevin Smith mentioned before. So I'll try to give you a few examples of the experiences gathered in Italy on invasive species, also to display some of the gaps and lessons that we can learn from our experience. First of all, in Italy, we have indeed made some progress. There is an increased awareness on the issue of invasive species. The legal framework has been improved over the years. There is a prohibition to release invasive alien species into the environment. Native and alien species are formally distinguished in legislation. That was not the case in the past. But what has changed quite much the issue is that since 2015, there is a European Union legislation on invasive species that includes many provisions for all EU member states, including Italy. And this has been enforced in Italy through a national specific legislation where the regional authorities are the main actors, and ISPRA, my agency, is the technical and scientific support body. So some of the provisions of the legal framework is that there is a restriction to introduce, transport, possess, breed, farm, trade and release into nature of a list of high-risk invasive alien species. And there is also an obligation to monitor the invasive species to prevent new introductions, to eradicate rapidly new infestations, and to apply effective control measures. We do have a major problem of lack of funding, but an amount of a budget has been provided to the regional authorities from the central government to help them to adopt the needed measures. So the new legislation helped us collect information on invasive species present in our country, and so we have quite a good idea of which are the areas that are more invaded by invasive species and where to prioritize action to respond to this threat. and the amount of money that has been provided from the central government has been distributed to regional authorities depending on their size and the presence of invasive species in their territories. This is especially for doing rapid eradication of invasive species. Also, following the European legislation, we developed national management plans for all species established in Italy of the species of high risk for the European legislation. 14 plans have been already formally adopted, and 30 plans are under consultation right now. And we need to produce more management plans in the coming years. Each plan has a 6 years validity term, and the plans describe the legal framework for each specific species, the distribution. It designs national and regional targets, and define also the actions that need to be enforced in terms of prevention, management, treatment of carcasses, soil, plants, and so on, staff involved, and also the monitoring of progresses through early detection of new introductions, evaluation of the spread, and especially the evaluation of the effectiveness of the management measures enforced by the regional authorities. For example, the Procambarus clarki, a highly invasive crayfish. We have a target at the national level not to eradicate but to control it, apart from a few regions where there is a target to eradicate because it is still localized. And the management plans describes the pathways of introduction and spread to improve prevention for the future, and identifies also which pathway are more relevant for the arrival of these species. This is a very important part of the work we do. So analyzing the pathways of introduction of invasive species is mandatory under the EU legislation, and we carried out an analysis at the national level, which are the pathways of introduction that are most relevant in terms of bringing in our country highly impacting invasive alien species. So these are part of the results that we have gathered. As you can see, we still have many species that arrive through escape from containment. This can be plants from horticulture or pets or other organisms from aquaculture and so on. And we have species arriving through corridors like the marine species, transport contaminant, and so on. We did an exercise to prioritize pathways based on the impact that the species arrive through each pathway cause to the environment. And as you can see, the top priorities in terms of pathways of arrival are the trade of pet, aquarium, terrarium species, and the trade of ornamental plants. So these were identified by our agency are the two priorities to deal with, and this has been formally adopted by the government as the basis for doing an action plan on pathways. And we produced action plans on alien pets and an action plan on alien horticultural species that have been adopted by the government and should be now enforced, with the target to reduce by 30% the rate of introduction of alien species imported through these two key pathways. We also had to develop a surveillance system. This is also mandatory under the EU legislation, and this has also been adopted. But if we look at the gaps in what we are doing in Italy, this can be shown through the results of an horizon scanning exercise that we did in the past and that helped us identify about 1,000 species that are not yet present in our territories but could arrive in the next future. We did this exercise involving almost 100 experts and evaluating almost 2,000 species. We also worked at raising awareness in the public, children, we also involved the private sectors, for example, tour operators, industries, plant traders, vets, and so on. But what I wanted to show you is the example of one recent case of arrival of an invasive alien species, and this is very strictly linked with colleague Goka just mentioned before for Japan. A few months ago, we had the arrival in Italy of the red imported fire ant, Solenopsis invicta, that is definitely one of the worst invaders in the world. This is a very invasive ant that can cause economic damage to agriculture, health problems to people because it's highly poisonous, and so it can create also huge economic problems, not only on biodiversity. This was considered a high-risk species for Italy, identified in the horizon scanning exercise as an ant that could possibly arrive in the next future and identified as a priority for prevention. The data we used were extracted from global data sets, such as the ones that Kevin Smith described before. We contacted leading experts from other countries to identify also management responses, and we used the risk assessments data that were available through global databases. However, the arrival of the ant showed that there were no dedicated prevention measures in place. The reporting from regional authorities was quite late. The species was identified in October last year and only reported in August of this year. And there was a limited ability to manage the species and no internal biosecurity measures to prevent the further spread of this ant from Sicily, the island where it was recorded, to other regions of Italy. So what we have seen over the years from the Italian case is that we do have measures in place in terms of prevention and management. We have a very solid basis of information globally that can support our work. But at the same time, our experience showed that there is still a limited commitment by authorities, decision makers to act when it's needed. We still have a reactive rather than proactive approach to invasive species, despite the global understanding that prevention is much more effective than response. There is still a limited coordination among the different sectors. So we had meetings after the discovery of this ant with the plant health sectors and the trade sectors that should be involved in regulating the export of plants from Sicily, the infested regions, to other regions of Italy. There is a limited funding at the local level for enforcing the needed measures. And still, there is a lack of cooperation in the sense that many authorities do not use the information that are made available globally. But after all, the main limit is that there is still a lower awareness in the public. We have done many campaigns to involve Italians in the struggle against invasive species, but there is still a lot of work to do, and we definitely need more action in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the interesting presentation and sharing with us what is happening in Italy. Just comparing these two presentations, we can see there's something in common, something different, which comes to show how important it is to share and learn from experiences in various countries and contexts. Let's see if there are any questions. Okay, now we can move on to the next agenda. The panel discussion among the speakers. And before the discussion, I'd like to briefly share the G7's initiative against the growing negative impacts brought by IAS. In this year's G7 Climate, Energy and Environment Ministers communique, the ministers shared their will to act upon the key findings of the IPBES IAS report to accelerate the implementation of Target 6 of the GBF. Moreover, Recognizing the need for enhancing international cooperation, we decided to hold a G7 workshop on IAS to discuss necessary measures and develop a set of recommendations. This webinar was also organized as a kickoff event of such an attempt to identify key concepts that we should keep in mind when developing a set of recommendations to address this issue. Although the set of recommendations is still under development, I'd like to very briefly share its big picture. In the current draft of the set of recommendations, we have 4 sections, including the introduction. The main section will be the third one, about enhanced cooperation against IAS. In this section, we now have 4 main pillars, as shown in the slide. Today, I'd like to invite experts in the field to share us their views on the following 3 questions to help us further develop the recommendations. 1. What is key to enhancing international regional cooperation toward minimizing the negative impacts caused by IAS? 2. How can we collaborate with the business sectors? 3. How can we build on this momentum to enhance international cooperation against IAS? As a lead-off, can Clarissa and Piero cover the first question?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Kumiko. As I have indicated earlier in my presentation, I have highlighted the importance of international and regional cooperation as a key factor to this. And I think integrated governance, was also highlighted by the IPBES assessment report, is one of the key factors here. That is why the ASEAN action plan was developed to improve policy coherence, to facilitate sharing of knowledge, to engage all stakeholders. So this is an integrated approach, and even in mobilizing resources. So the management of IAS is a shared responsibility among countries, and therefore regional and international cooperation is important. We need to promote these regional approaches as, obviously, as we have heard, this is a transboundary issue, the invasive alien species, and it cannot be done by single countries alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Piero, can you answer the question also?
Yes, thank you. As I tried to show in my presentation, we have a lot of information that is available globally, but we definitely need to improve the exchange of data to make information more easily accessible. And we need to use the data that have been compiled so far to raise the awareness of the public and also to increase the awareness among the decision makers as well of the private sectors. For example, in the example that I made, the horticultural sector is an essential partner to involve. So I believe that with the release of the IPBES assessment and the data that IUCN is circulating, we should use this momentum to increase the awareness of the public and also to improve the involvement of private sector and the networking among databases to improve the access to key information.
Thank you very much. So it was pointed out that because the issue is transboundary, the regional approach is indispensable, and also the more accessible information, as well as increasing the public awareness. Is there anything else which is really important?
Yeah, if I can add on it.
Yes.
Definitely, the European experience is based on a European-wide legislation and on the strong encouragement to collaborate among countries. for example, inaction by one country or by one region in Italy could affect other countries. So it is essential that we work with other countries in order to prevent the spread of invasive species and to improve the circulation of key information that are needed for other countries to respond to new incursions. So I think that the dialogue and a strong cooperation is essential, because after all, this is something that this is a problem that is always related to movement of species from one country to another. So it cannot be solved only at the national scale, and international cooperation and dialogue is essential.
Thank you. Probably regular dialogue between or among countries, you said? Okay, thank you.
Among countries, yes.
Among countries, okay.
Yes.
I'd like to go to the second question. Can Laura and Goka Sensei cover the second question?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of collaborating with the business sectors, I think there's very high importance of generating awareness and setting up the right forums and platforms to have an open dialogue with organisations. From my presentation and others as well, there was the point was made that there is low awareness across certain sectors and many organisations around the issue of invasive species, and particularly how to measure it on small scales, but also extrapolating this information upwards to create understand the risks at the global level for organisations that are larger. So I think building awareness around that and starting open dialogues with organisations to understand what is practical for them to do, and providing guidance for them to do this in a standardised way would create huge strides and leaps towards moving in the right direction. I think it needs to be encouraged with regulation and policy that builds up with scientists and working with the market in order to create greater awareness for it. I also think that there's a lack of understanding from business in terms of how invasive alien species can result with financial risk for them. So to understand actually what the impact is for nature, how does this turn into financial risks or possibly opportunities for the organisation, and being able to demonstrate this will create greater awareness and kind of put it on their agenda for stuff they should be measuring.
Thank you very much. You pointed out the importance of the developing of guidance and also the raising awareness among businesses about the financial risks and opportunities brought by IAS issues. Thank you. Goka Sensei, can you answer the question?
Yeah, in general, in the context of TNFD, many companies tend to focus on direct factors such as land use and serious resource extraction, and they may not yet fully grasp the connection between invasive species and corporate profits. However, in countries heavily reliant on global supply chains, such as we Japan, the impact of invasive species on corporate activities can become extremely immediate and substantial. As I talked in my presentation, invasive species can potentially lead to significant non-tariff barriers in the context of international trade. We need to understand that preventing the invasion of invasive species and stopping their export are essential tasks directly linked to the preservation of both national and corporate economic interests. Both the Ministry of the Environment and the ecologists have had a significant tendency to prioritize the assessment or research of the risk of invasive species in terms of ecosystem damage and threats to rare species up to now. However, from now on, they will be expected to provide companies with quantitative assessments of economic damage and concrete measures. I myself have been encouraging the participation of pesticide manufacturers in invasive species control efforts, contributing to development of invasive species control agents, and thereby facilitating the expansion of new market and the enhancement of corporate images. On the other hand, we must consider that today's global economy, which excessively relies on resource imports from overseas, is the ultimate driver of the increase in invasive species. So striving for a sustainable resource recycling society is also a comprehensive challenge facing both nations and businesses for a fundamental solution to the problem of invasive alien species, I think.
Thank you very much, Goka-sensei. The what you mentioned about the development of invasive species control agent, it's exactly the opportunity that Laura just mentioned for the businesses. It's really concrete. And also, I think it's a really important and interesting point to link with the realization of the sustainable resource recycling society things with the IAS issues. Thank you. And lastly, I would like to move on to the third questions. I'd like to ask this question to Kevin and the co-chairs of the IPBES assessment and Marianela. And firstly, I'd like to ask Kevin to answer.
Thank you very much. Sure. So how can we build on this momentum? I think the best thing that we can hope for really is we really want to try and secure that political and private sector engagement on the issue of invasive alien species. If we can support them in raising awareness within their sectors, that would be fantastic. But I think the really important one is that we need them to kind of speak up on invasive alien species in arenas outside of the environment and biodiversity bubble that a lot of us operate in. I think especially in sectors such as climate change, trade and e-commerce in particular, agriculture, health, I think we really need engagement. We need kind of private and both public sector leaders to engage with those sectors. We're not going to be successful working at an international level if we just do it within the environmental sector. It's got to be done across those different sectors. And that's going to require, I think, this political and private sector leaders to commit and invest in that engagement process. Of course, I think we need the resources as well to be made available to facilitate that process. And like as Piero and many people mentioned, including myself, one area is the need to resource that data provision, mobilization aspect. I also think another key area is on the development and sharing of technologies to support, particularly on prevention, detection, and management. There are many areas where working at a regional and international scale can help everybody. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, the sustainable financing to maintain and updating these global asset, I think that this kind of data sets is really important things. Thank you. And then someone from the co-chairs, could you answer the questions?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think Kevin's really covered most of what I would say, but I think we need to take advantage of the assessment in particular. And I'm hoping that different actors involved in this can leverage, I think is a key word, use the assessment in your argumentation for more funding, more resources to be devoted to this problem. And this has to take place at the high level partnership actions. It's wonderful to see the G7 focusing on this. And I know a subsequent meeting, we will be even more focused on it. The Interagency Liaison Group, which is working with the CBD, is wonderful as well. And then just in general, taking advantage, of course, of the Montreal Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework. Links with other issues, as Kevin indicated, so important here as well. Climate, health, trade, at the highest level, we should be making those, stressing the importance of those amongst government agents and politicians. Capacity building at the national level, we need to see more of that take place across the international community, and of course involving Indigenous peoples and local communities as part of those solutions as well. But in terms of strategy building, capacity development is key here, and that will no doubt take some funding. And then finally, I would argue that information sharing and monitoring, I think our assessment really stresses the importance of that and can be leveraged. I think that there's a critical infrastructure that's already there, as Kevin made clear through his presentation, in terms of information sharing and databases that already exist. So they just need to be fortified, perhaps, maybe improved in some ways if possible. One area where we might need more work in particular is on online commerce and what's going on there. And we do discuss that in the assessment, and the CBD's covered this as well. And then finally, media campaigns. Never overlook the importance of that and leveraging this issue for media. And as I said in my initial presentation, not just at the national or international level, but at the local level, and what that can do to influence people's behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, you commented about the high-level partnership. In my understanding, it could be the leadership of government and various sectors. Am I right? And also you mentioned about the importance of the indigenous and local communities involvement, and looking at the online commerce and the role of media campaigns. Thank you very much. These are very important points. And then I'd like to ask Marianela about the third question.
Yes, thank you. I think Kevin and Peter have already provided very important points, so I will just add to that. But I echo the part that we're in a good momentum with for example, with the GBF recently approved, which will trigger national actions to ensure that the countries will align their policies and regulations and their own frameworks with the GBF. So this is going to be done through the update of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And of course, there's room for actions on invasive alien species. And I think because that's going to happen very soon in the next couple of years, I think this is when we really can have effective international collaboration and cooperation to support countries in doing that. It's sooner rather than later, because as I mentioned before, we only have 7 years to achieve the target. And now when the countries are actually starting to revise those action plans that will trigger national actions on invasive alien species, it's particularly important in terms of time frame. And I think that we have seen that not all the countries have the same capacity to address the issue. So I think in this sense, international cooperation to support the countries towards those efforts is important. I also like to echo what Peter said about using the assessment now. I think the assessment provides useful information for international entities and also for national authorities to deal and to reflect on what we can do on invasive alien species. So now that the assessment it's trendy and it's on all the media, and we need to really use this opportunity to make the best of it and try to see how we can use that information into the policy process and link or bridging that gap between science and policy to really make it more effective. And finally, I think I also wanted to mention the importance of maintaining the operation of structures for multilateral cooperation like the LACEN group and probably beyond that as well, even not only at an international level, but also at national level, across sectors, right? Within and across sectors, based on the characteristics of the topic of invasive alien species, right, and the cross-cutting nature of the topic, and probably also to mention that we can engage other sectors that are not only the usual suspects, like environment, for example, right, and we can engage other sectors that are linked to pathways of introduction, and that sometimes they are private sector or tourism or so many other activities, and try to raise awareness and try to build partnerships with them to tackle the issue in a more coherent manner at a global level. So I think that's, those would be my points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianela. Yeah, it's really the time. We have to make the best of it at this current momentum. And we have less than 7 years, right, to achieve the targets. And you mentioned about the collaboration across sectors. I mean, for global context as a liaison group, or maybe beyond the liaison group, and also domestically, we have to create some collaborative network across sectors. We have a little bit time, so I'd like to invite Annabelle and Helen to answer any questions among these 3 questions. If you can, if you can answer. Sorry, this spontaneous request to answer the questions.
Oh, thank you very much for that opportunity. It's been really wonderful to hear the responses from others, and I couldn't agree more with all that we have been hearing, particularly around the partnerships and capacity building and communication. And perhaps that's just the part that I might dwell on a little more, is around the importance of communication. And I think that is in many different ways to many different audiences. But I think we really have this opportunity with the momentum that we're seeing at the moment to ensure that that communication is effective as possible, and that people really do understand the magnitude of the threat of invasive alien species. I think, you know, it's possibly a threat that has been somewhat underestimated in the past. And I think that now with this comprehensive assessment, really the evidence is compelling of the threat. But I think also, just as we've been hearing, that the solutions are within our grasp. There are tangible actions that can be taken to ensure that we can effectively address this major threat, and indeed make really substantial progress towards the 2030 target. So I think that's really exciting opportunities for us all. And we've had really fantastic presentations around different sectors and different avenues of involvement. But yes, I think that communication is really important, and I think we've seen just outstanding examples of that throughout the presentations today. So I very much appreciated that, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. I think you made a really good point about the importance of communication of the magnitude of threat, as well as we still hope that we can manage these problems. Thank you. How about Annabelle?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my feeling is similar to what Helen was suggesting, that the magnitude of this problem, and I think what had changed probably in the last years, and probably is emphasized in our report, is that invasive alien species are one, again, of the major threats to biodiversity and also to people and people's good quality of living. So in a way, I think we have gone through the anecdote towards this real, existential threat of all these factors. And the invasive alien species is one of those, and I think now people are seeing this more clearly. That it's not just anecdotes of different species arriving and making a specific problem, but they are as a whole a major issue. And I think we just one point on collaboration. I think we really need more international collaboration. I see a lot of governments and colleagues from countries that are not so favored in terms of resources and academic development and institutional development that really require more help from those places that that they have that achievement already. That they have the institution, they have the law, so that there could be a lot more collaboration and dialogue among different countries and different levels of achievements in terms of dealing with this threat. So I think that's really important. And with that, I'm saying that we can find local solutions everywhere. I think that's certainly a positive thing that we have found in our assessment. So yeah. So we are optimistic on getting to this, but we really need political will, and we really need resources. And it sounds like obvious, but I think we really need to ask for this when we are in these international settings. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Yes, we really need international collaboration, and also we have to tackle locally. And there should be the local solution. And it was really encouraging what you mentioned about. I wonder if there are anybody who want to wrap up or made a reflections what we all said.
I can say a few words.
Yes, please. Oh, thank you very much.
I'm still here. So, I really can really echo what my colleagues have said, in particular regarding, and that's what the assessment underlines, the importance of cross-sectoral collaboration. And that really applies at the national level, but also at the international level. And so that is about invasive species getting out of the ministries of environment around the world and being placed at the center of agricultural policy, tourism policy, forestry policy, health policy. So it really is about all of these other sectors also making invasive species their own and embracing the topic. And that also applies at the international level. And so, for example, FAO would also, just like CBD has processes, would also need to really tackle, because it's a big issue for agriculture, or the World Tourism Organization, or the pet trade, all of those. And so that's one which is really just repeating what has been said and placing emphasis, because that's really a key in what we are talking about. And it often seems that it is only, and yet again, because it's often the case for biodiversity, that it's placed only in ministries of environment, and so that needs to stay there very importantly, but also become issues of the other sectors, both at the national and at the international level. And then perhaps also just one aspect that perhaps hasn't been developed enough. Helen has talked about communication, and I would add education, which is also very close. It is a topic. Invasive alien species, we see it with the huge success in the media that really speaks to people. And Hannibal talked about the anecdotal aspects, and it is an issue that has global significance, but also is of local importance. And when you start giving examples, it is something that people can quickly understand, and it's actually a good way to also speak about other biodiversity-related issues. And so I think there is quite a bit to do on education, on training children, for example, so that, in future, people will become much more aware of invasive species. And that, I believe, is something that would be hugely exciting for children, both understanding it intellectually, but also perhaps harnessing them in projects where they go and become active themselves in projects to control, for example, local invasive species. So those are my two reflections on what has already been very well said by all of the speakers before me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm really appreciate your participation in these panel discussions. and staying with us. You mentioned about the whole of government approach and also whole of society approach that are in the GBF, right? And also you pointed out the importance of the education, communication and education, especially for the children. It's really important issues. I'm really reluctantly to say that I have to close this panel discussion because now the closing time is approaching. Otherwise, we're gonna miss our last train to go home. So I'd like to try to synthesize our discussions. Let me try. This is a tentative wrap-up, but in terms of collaboration beyond boundaries, first and foremost, the discussions highlight the importance of information exchange among countries on IAS to aid prevention and management efforts. Regular meetings among countries and regions would be effective for enabling this. We also reaffirm the importance of supporting the operation and further development of structures for multilateral cooperation that, for example, it was mentioned about IAS liaison groups, interagency liaison groups. Secondly, regarding trans-sectoral collaboration, we discussed this matter focused especially on business sectors. It was pointed out that the IS issue is directly linked with the economic interests and risks of countries and companies. Developing standardized guidance would therefore be beneficial in this regard. It was further pointed out that realization of a sustainable resource circulating society could reduce the risk of IAS. It's clear from the discussion that commitments by leaders across various sectors are vital. Finally, the need for sustainable support to maintain data and information bases was stressed, as research, database, and information systems are essential for monitoring and developing effective countermeasures. And also, it was mentioned about the importance of education and involvement of the indigenous and local communities and whole of government and whole of society's approach. As the G7 presidency, Japan is committed to leading the IS-related initiative and developing a set of recommendations by the end of this year. To achieve this, we'll organize 2 more consultation workshops. I'd like to quickly introduce our plan. The next workshop would be on 15th October at the side event of the CBD Sabusta 25 in Nairobi, Kenya, to discuss further on international collaboration, considering the outcomes of today's webinar. Then, the final workshop of this year will be in Tokyo with G7 members. At this workshop, we will discuss necessary measures to accelerate the implementation of Target 6 of the GBF, which would be the culmination of a series of workshops and consultations currently going on. The outcome of these events will be made available on the webpage of the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. Also, for today's webinar, we will archive the recordings on our YouTube. We have a channel of YouTube. And also, there's some request about the presentation materials for the today. We'll check with all speakers if it's okay or not. And if it's okay, we'll make it available probably through emails from the Secretariat to the participants. So finally, I'd like to make some remarks. In addressing issues such as IAS, stronger collaboration among countries and sectors, as well as individuals, is necessary. I hope today's webinar has been helpful for all of us to reflect on our own activities and see the additional steps we can take. Again, we'd like to thank all of you, the speakers, panelists, participants, interpreters, technicians, and my colleagues and others for your very helpful contributions. With that, I'd like to conclude the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you so much.
Bye.